Welcome to the third in the webinar, the HESES21 training. This is the third webinar in the series. Today we'll be learning how to identify and count your students. I'll be your guide to that today. I'm Will. I'm one of the funding officers at the OFS. I'll just go through a little bit of housekeeping now, as we've got a few more people entering. As I said, today I'll be leading you through the presentation. I've got Roger, who's my backup, just in case my internet goes down. We've got Ross on Q&A today, as he was in the previous webinars. And just a reminder that if you haven't attended the seminars, the webinars even that we had last week, the Q&As we do that via the Q&A box, and we try and keep the chat box free, just in case you've got any problems that you need to speak to the event support about. Yeah, we also find it handy if with the Q&A you could not ask questions anonymously, because if we want to resolve something or follow up on some questions you ask, it's handy to have your name so we can help answer your question. And then other things are, we've got closed captions available again today. So these are automatically generated, might not be perfect, but we hope they're useful enough for you to use the feature if you're relying on that today. Again, today's session will be being recorded and it'll be available on the OFS website shortly after, and well, a day or so after we've finished here today, and you'll be able to find it on the OFS events page where you signed up to the event, or on our YouTube channel. Once again, the intended audience for this seminar is those who are new to HESES, or those who need a refresher after maybe being out for a couple of years even. And if you do have any feedback for us, please tell us. We do have those who've signed up to fill in an evaluation form. We'll be getting it after the next webinar, at the fourth one in the series. But if you have any other comments you want to bring our attention to before that, you can always email us at HESES@officerstudents.org.uk. So there you go. And then, so as you can see from the bold type here, we're on our third of the 4 webinars today for our new HESES staff. You can still sign up for the 4th one, and we have our later next week we'll also have our hands-on exercise work in breakout groups that we do. Unfortunately, this is currently fully subscribed, but you can join the backup list at the events page on our website, which is officeforstudents.org.uk/events, and to be added to the waiting list. But currently, as I say, the event is full. We're trying our best to resolve that moment. Okay, supporting materials for today, as I've said, the recording with the event and today's slide will be available from the Officer Students events page. And in addition, we've also got the main resource, which is going to be the main resources which you can find at the officerstudents.org.uk/HESES. The primary one here is going to be the HESES guidance document, HESES21, which we published a couple of weeks ago. We've also just published last week on the same page, which is officerstudents.org.uk/HESES, so how to complete the HESES21 workbook publication, which is a more in-depth look at how to actually fill in the workbook rather than the definitions, etc., which are in the main guidance publication. In addition to this, we've also got the videos on the OFS YouTube page, which can be very helpful in addition to the seminars, the webinars even. And for an overview on OFS funding, we've got the Guide to Funding 2021-22 publication, which will be out by the end of the week, fingers crossed. We're just waiting for a few things to be finalised on that. And then one last thing that's really helpful is you can sign up for the Officer Students email alerts at our website, and I think you can find the link from the main page, and this will alert you to when any new publications are published, and it will also help point you towards certain events and any deadlines that are coming up. So what we'll cover today So we're going to be looking at how to count years in HESES, and how this includes like how to determine the start dates of years of instance and the correct column in which to return the years of instance for the students, how to make forecasts of non-completion and full-time equivalents. So this is how we're going to make accurate predictions of the two elements in HESES, which are required for column 3 and column 4A. And lastly, we're going to look at how to complete the healthcare tables, which are tables 6A, 6B and 6C. These are additional tables which are only relevant for certain providers who are teaching specific pre-registration healthcare courses. But first, we're going to start by thinking about how we count years of instance. And the first thing we need to do is identify which of our years of instance belong to column 1 and which belong to column 2 in the workbook. So let's first remind ourselves what we learned in the last webinar, which you can rewatch anytime online now, as the recording has been published to YouTube. At the end of the last webinar, we learned how to categorize our students based on the definitions and the HESES guidance. So we were able to categorize the students by mode. So as you can see, we're in table 1 here, and we know table 1 was for full-time students, table 2 was for sandwich year out students, and table 3 was for part-time students. And within each of these modes, we've got further categories. So the first of these is price group. So one of the 6 price groups, which reflects the course running costs, which we can see is on the leftmost column of the table. Secondly, we can categorize our students by the length of their course, which is determined by whether they're on 45 weeks or more of study, of active study in the year of instance. Thirdly, by level, which is either undergraduate, postgraduate, taught, which splits into one of 3 levels, which is undergraduate fee, master's learn or other, and then finally we have postgraduate research. And lastly, we learned to categorize the students by fundability status, which is whether the student is home fee, and within this whether they're OFS fundable or non-fundable, or whether the students are going to be overseas. And once we have these categories defined for a year of instance, we can start to look at the columns within the sheet. So, we'll be looking at whether today we'll be looking at whether years of instance should be recorded in column 1 or 2, which are highlighted in orange on the screen. Then we'll look at making a forecast of the years recorded in column 1 and 2 that will not complete the year, called non-completions, which will be recorded in column 3. And with the information filled in columns 1, 2 and 3, the workbook will automatically calculate the estimated completed years in column 4, which is one of the main sources we use to calculate funding allocations for the year ahead. So we need to point out that when counting student activity in HESES, we are counting years of instance, which is not the same as student headcount. A student at your provider that is studying on a course that meets our definition of recognised higher education is accountable in HESES, and their study can be broken down into a number of years of instance for which they're engaging with your provider. The first year of instance is generated when a student begins studying towards a qualification and engages with your provider. So for example, if a student registers with you and starts their course on the 4th of October, that's when their first year of instance starts. Second and subsequent years of instance for the study of the qualification will start on or near the anniversary of when the student first started studying on their course. So for this student I've just imagined who starts on the 4th of October 2021, their second year of instance will start on the 4th of October 2022, and so on for following years until they complete their course. The dates here aren't completely rigid, as we do allow for minor variation in term dates, but generally we're looking at the anniversary of the start date of their first year of instance. So it's important to make note of what that is. So a reminder that we don't count all years of instance in HESES. So years of instance are only countable if the following criteria are met. Firstly, a fee has to be charged. The fee may be waived for an individual, but usually we do not expect this to extend to an entire course or cohort of students. And secondly, the FTE for the year is at least 0.03 FTE. And this works out that a student must be doing a minimum of about 2 weeks of activity in a year to be counted. Additionally, students are not counted if they're writing up a thesis or similar for the whole year of instance. They must be actively studying to have a year of instance counted in HESES. And lastly, the student may not have withdrawn within 2 weeks of starting their year of instance. And we mean having left the course entirely, not just those who may have suspended their studies. For instance, if someone starts in September, but then decides actually they want to start the course in January, you could still include them because they have the intention of carrying on to study for more than 2 weeks. So how do we ensure we're recording years of instance correctly in the HESES survey? And which HESES do we record them in? So the diagram represents 2 students on different years of instance. On the top row in the bluey green, we've got 1 year, and on the bottom row in yellow, we've got another. So both students start their courses in the 2021 academic year, as we can see from the diagram, continuing on to their second years in 2022, 2021, 2022. The years of instance that start in 2020-21 are both recorded in HESES 20. And although some of the activity for the student represented at the top in the green-blue occurs in the 2021-22 academic year, all of the activity for it will have been recorded in HESES 20. This box may represent a student who studies from January 2021 to December 2021, whose course would overlap 2 academic years. But when recording years of instance in HESES, you have to remember we are only looking at when the year of instance starts. And as this was in the 2020-21 academic year, the year of instance is returned in HESES 20. In the following year, the same occurs again. Both years of instance begin in the 2021-22 academic year, and both are recorded in their entirety in HESES 21 for the reasons mentioned above. We can also see, as we mentioned in the last slide, the years of instance start again on or close to the anniversary of the anniversary date of the first year of instance commencing. So we saw on the last slide how the start dates of years of instance are important when recording them correctly in the HESES return. But start dates are also important because they will determine whether years are recorded in column 1 or column 2 of the HESES workbook. The start date and the census date determine which column a given year of instance will be recorded in. Census dates differ for different providers, depending on the type of provider. For further education and sixth form colleges and academies, the census date is the 1st of November, and for all other providers, the census date is the 1st of December. The reason the HESES census dates vary between these different types of providers is partly historical, but also because of when the individualized student data returns are due, as they are different for colleges who complete the individualized learner record than they are for other providers who return data to HESES in form of their HESES student record or the HESES alternative student record. To determine whether a year of instance will be recorded in column 1 or column 2, you need to know whether the years are beginning before or after the census date for your provider. If the year of instance starts before the census date, it will be recorded in column 1. If the year of instance starts or is predicted to start after the census date, that year of instance will be recorded in column 2 or forecast in column 2. So this essentially splits your HESES into 2 groups. Those that have begun their year of instance in the current academic year and by the census date in column 1, and those students that you're forecasting to start in the remainder of the current academic year in column 2. So this commonly includes any January or April starters, but obviously would include any starters all the way up to the end of July. And for this year, it will be up to the 31st of July, 2022. We also just have a little final point to make here, that is, if a student has withdrawn before the census date, they shouldn't be returned in HESES. For example, if they studied for a number of weeks at college but withdrew before November, they shouldn't be included in the HESES return at all. And again, this is only if they've withdrawn entirely from their studies, not just if they're suspending them to return at a later date. To help with this idea of when to return student years, we have a concept of standard and non-standard years. You won't find this wording in the HESES workbook, but it's a useful way to frame certain years of instance to ensure that we are returning them correctly. For us, a standard year is when all the activity for a year of instance is contained within a single academic year. On the screen is an example of a standard year. So box A shows the activity, in 2020-21 for this year of instance that started after the 1st of August 2020 and was completed before the 1st of August 2021. The following year is a standard year 2, as again, all the activity for the year of instance is contained within one academic year. And this is what should happen as our second and subsequent years of instance start on or around the anniversary of the initial year of instance start date. So this standard year is likely to be the pattern for a majority of students and providers, where they have lots of students starting in September or October and taking exams in June. So it's likely that a lot of your students will be standard years of instance that will be recorded in column 1. There are occasionally standard years of instance that may fall into column 2, although this study pattern is not very likely. So you can see here, a student on this study pattern would begin their course in January every year and would complete it before the end of July, meaning that all the activity of their year of instance would be contained within one academic year, therefore making it a standard year. What is much more likely is that column 2 students will be on non-standard years, as we'll see on this next slide. So here we can see an example of a non-standard year that would be recorded in column 2. In this example, the student would study from January to December, following a calendar year pattern, and that would mean their year of instance would span 2 academic years, with box A covering January 2021 to December 2021 in this example, which would span the 2020-21 and 2021-22 academic years, meaning the year of instance would be non-standard. Now, as the year of instance shown in box A is non-standard, and because of its pattern, the student will be studying on the HESES21 census date for their 2020-21 year of instance. What we need to do is avoid recording this year of instance represented in box A in HESES21. This is because we're only recording those years of instance that start in the 2021-22 academic year in HESES21. So you can see this course, even though it's still active on the census date, started before and started in the previous academic year, so it would not belong in HESES21. So for HESES21, only the blue-green box on the right-hand side, box B, is recorded in HESES21. This year of instance contains student activity starting in January 2022 and running until December 2022. And this is the year of instance starting in the 2021-22 academic year, so it's recorded in HESES21. Box A would have been recorded in HESES20 in the previous year, as its year of instance started in the 2020-21 academic year. Ultimately, the point we're trying to get across here is that it's very important to be clear about what years of instance belong to which HESES return. And the easiest way to tell this is that those years of instance that start in the 2021 academic year would or should have been returned in HESES20, and those years of instance that start in the 2021-22 academic year will be returned in HESES21. If you're still unsure about which return a year of instance should be returned in, please get in touch with us at HESES@officeforstudents.org.uk, and we'll be happy to help. So now we've covered, hopefully covered that a little bit into sorting the students which need to be in column 1 and column 2. I'm going to move on to the courses table, and this is the courses table is for colleges only. But importantly, on the courses table, you're only recording column 1 years of instance. So as I said, the courses table only available to colleges due to the way that the courses are registered with the ESFA, the Education Skills Funding Agency, through the Learning Aims database. And it assigns all courses a learning aim, and then we can therefore use the learning aims to include information about the years of instance on these courses in the courses table. So the data entered in the courses table will then automatically populate column 1 of tables 1, 2, 3, and 5. Sorry, just need to point out that as we've got, you can see on the table, we've got the modes in the courses table are separated into 3. So we can see we've got a full-time column, and so we can see the data entered in this column would populate the column 1 of table 1. So remembering that the courses table is only used by colleges and it won't appear for anyone else, so there's no error of someone incorrectly recording it. It is only used to record years of instance that start before the census date. So for 1st of November, as everyone filling it in will be colleges, and therefore will only be students that belong to column 1. Again, as I just mentioned on the previous slide, the data will automatically populate to column 1 of tables 1, 2, and 3. The column 2, those who are filling out the HESES workbook for colleges will have to manually go into tables 1, 2, 3, and 5 to fill in any years of instance that start after the census date. So we will have to manually fill in the column 2 years of instance, as the courses table only records column 1 years of instance. And recording in the courses table is unsurprisingly done at the course level, and this is done by entering the learning aim. The learning aims, as previously mentioned, which we use, and we use the ESFA's learning aim database to do this. And using the table will automatically fill in the course title, price group, level, and length from the learning aim entered. And some of this data is overwritable, such as price group ratios that need to be entered, and you'll also be able to change the course level and length. If you don't currently have a learning aim, please contact us as soon as possible at heses@officerstudents.org.uk. And additionally, as soon as the workbook is available for your provider, it is good practice to check your learning aim in the workbook, so that if there's any incorrect information, it's spotted nice and early, so we can either correct this, or you can contact the ESFA to correct the learning aim whilst we've still got a bit of time before the HESES deadline. So just some notes on completing the courses table here. You must use a specific learning aim for each course, and there are limits on how many times you may enter the same learning aim. You shouldn't record 2 separate lines with the same learning aim to record full-time and part-time versions of a course, as I just pointed out, because this can all be done on the same line, as we've got columns for each mode on the courses table. There are occasions where you may need to enter the same learning aim twice. There may be occasions where you need to enter the same learning aim twice, but these are quite rare, so you may want to consult the guidance if you think you may need to do this. Again, you can contact us via email. Price groups for each course are defined by the learning aim, but price group splits will need to be entered manually. The price group split is to be determined by the provider and will depend upon the modules that make up the course. You will have to enter a price group split for any course with multiple price groups, and it is okay to record a course as being split as 100% in one price group and 0% in another, if that is the way the course is taught, although it may trigger a credibility check. You shouldn't enter a split of 1% to 99% just to get around that check. You should be trying to reflect the level of activity being taught in each price group as accurately as possible to the nearest whole percentage. So quite often this can be done at a module basis. So we might even get like 6 or thirds in here, and that's quite a common split. But obviously we need to round these to the nearest whole percentage. Additionally, level and length are automatically completed, but can be overwritten if necessary. And as previously mentioned, there are separate columns in the table for each mode. So we've got separate column on the right hand side for full-time, part-time, and sandwich it out. And within these columns, there are separate columns for fee status, which is either home fee or overseas, fundability status, which is OFS fundable or non-fundable, and domicile, which is going to be UK domiciled or other domiciled. All of these topics we covered in the webinar last week, and using them we can split up our countable years of instance into the correct columns and complete the courses table. Remembering, of course, that all students in the courses table must belong to column 1, which is to say they must be students starting before the census date. And the information entered in the courses table will automatically populate column 1 of tables 1, 2, 3, and 5. And then just got a final note on the courses table here, which is for courses that involve a top-up, for example, going straight from a foundation year to a top-up for a bachelor's degree, or similarly when you're studying a HNC and it's followed up by topping up to a HND, and where a student is progressing but staying in the same broad level, so UG in these cases, we would consider this to be single year of instance or single engagement with your provider. And because we see it as a single engagement, we do not want the years of instance for these to be recorded as 2 separate years of instance, where the top-up element would overlap into the same year of instance as the final year of the lower aim. So where this happens, where you've got, say, you've got a year of instance that continues all the way to August, and the HND or top-up course starts before that year of instance ends, you want to include the activity for that year of instance. First of all, you want to include the activity for the HND in that year of instance, but also you want to record you want to record the whole year of instance under the higher aim for that student. So so where this happens, it's a rare occasion, and you might want to seek further clarification in the guidance. I think there are examples in there on this. Providers should return students under the higher learning aim where for the year of instance where a top element overlaps with a lower aim. Again, we can also answer questions on this in our email address, which is heses@officerstudents.org.uk. They might be a little bit too complicated to ask in the Q&A right now, but that is what we're about to move on to. So I can see we've got 1 or 2 questions in there already. So I'm going to pass over to Ross, who should be appearing in a second, to answer the first few Q&A questions.
Hi, Will, thank you. Yes, we've got 2 questions so far, which are to do with years of instance. So we'll go on to those. If you do have any further questions, if we don't get a chance to answer them now, there are 2 more question and answer sessions during this presentation. So we won't ignore the questions, we'll come back to them later on. So the first question is Pauline, who's asked about the start date for a student. I want to know if the start is when the student enrolls, when induction starts, or when the actual teaching starts. So if I just go across to my handy notes, it is specifically when the student first starts undertaking activity as part of their course, because that's when they begin actively studying. So it doesn't include enrollment or the induction period. So you're looking at when they actually do start studying. The second question is from Tom, is something that is certainly worth looking at, is possibly a bit complicated, so, and would certainly be easier for me to answer if I could draw a diagram for you. So I will do my best to answer this question. I think it's worth bringing it to everybody because it is, there are some bits which are certainly worth emphasizing. So Tom's question is, if a student's first instance was from April 2020 to March 2021, but they then defer for a term to complete the second year of study from September 2021 to July 2022. How should this be returned? So in particular, he's looking at the fact that the anniversary of the start date is April, but the student is inactive at that point. So as I said, we'll try and do our best to answer this, but if I manage to confuse people, then please let us know and we can handle similar questions by email, where I can get my PowerPoint skills out and I can draw some nice diagrams to sort of set the different years together. So the first key point we probably want to emphasize here is that year of instance always starts on that anniversary date. So you're always considering the activity that takes place within that year of instance, no matter whether they are deferring for a short amount of time or not. So in this case, the student you'll be looking at their first year of instance, and it's their same as their first year of study. So it's the study they're doing between April 2020 and March 2021. Their second year of instance will always be on that anniversary. So the second year of instance, you'd be looking at any activity that takes place between April 2021 and March 2022. And then their third year of instance, you'll be looking between March 2020, so April 2022 and March 2023. So you're looking always within that 12-month block starting on that anniversary date. So in this case, because they've postponed their study and they're not starting their second year of study until September 2021, that second year of study will effectively be split between 2 years of instance. So you'll be looking at the activity that they undertake between September 2021 and March 2022 as recorded in their second year of instance. So that would have been recorded in this case, you would have tried to forecast that in HESES 20 last year. And then you're looking at their activity that they're undertaking between March 2022 till the end of their study in July 2022, and then that would be what you're trying to record in HESES 21, because that's the year of instance that will start within the 21-22 academic year. So because we've got three different concepts here, we've got academic years, we've got years of instance, and then potentially we've got years of study. This is why it's sometimes easier to look at this with a diagram. So I hope that helps. It's certainly, we want to emphasize that point that you're looking purely within the activity that takes place within that idea of the different years of instance when you're looking at how to record things in HESES. If you have complicated scenarios like this, please let us know, because it is something that we are happy to go through with you. But it can usually be easy to do that outside of the confines of a webinar. So I hope that helps. If it isn't, please let us know, send us an email, and we'll be happy to help. We haven't had any more questions in at the moment, Will, so I'm going to pass back to you. And if we get any more, please send them in if anything comes up. It can be related to this idea of years of instance. We can still go back to those, and we will see what questions we have for the second block. So over to you, Will.
Thank you, Ross. Yes, so the second block is going to be focusing on non-completions, and also we'll be after this we'll be looking at FTE before going back to Ross again for any Q&A. So if you've got any questions, start thinking them up now, or ask them any time before the Q&A starts, and that's also fine. So first of all, let's go and look through our table 1. So we've covered how to complete columns 1 and 2 by identifying our years of instance and then dividing these into each column by whether they start before or after the census date. So all years of instance that meet the definition to be counted in HESES 21 will be recorded in column 1 of either table 1, 2, or 3. But we know from previous years that some of these years of instance that are entered into columns 1 and 2 will not be completed, as a student does not always complete their intended studies for the year. We're focused on funding the years of instance where students do complete their study intentions, so we need a forecast of non-completions to be made. The non-completed years are added to the total years in column 1 and column 2 to give us a total number of completed years in column 4, which, as mentioned earlier, is one of the key areas we use to gather information to calculate our funding allocations for the following year. So to do this, we have to look at our definition of completion. So the OFS has a very specific definition of non-completion, which may not be the same as the definition for completion used across the rest of the HE sector. So our definition states that all students start their year instance with a study intention. They may have a certain number of modules to complete in the year. For some courses, the intentions may be the same for all students if all modules are compulsory, but will vary if there's choice in the modules. Ultimately, it's important to ascertain what the study intention of students are at the start of the year, so that completion can be accurately reported against these intentions. A defined study intention is important because our definition for completion is that a student must complete all of their initial study intention, and they must do this within 13 months of the start of the year of instance. We allow 13 months because this allows for any resits that happen, because often if you've got a student that starts their course in say September, the opportunity for resits might not happen until just after their anniversary date or something like that. So we allow 30 months to allow for resits. It's important to note for our definition that completion is not the same as progression, where a student may be allowed to progress even if they've not completed all their study intention by the end of the year. This isn't what we would define as completion. So we'd say a student can complete a module in one of two ways. So they can undergo the final assessment in a module. This does not mean they have to pass the assessment, they just need to have attended it for it to count as completion. So say it was an exam, if they turn up to the exam, they write their name, they might not write much else, that would still count as undergoing the final assessment of the module. Alternatively, if the structure of the module allows, the student can have passed the module without undergoing the final assessment. So this is common where the majority of a student's grade comes from the coursework that's undertaken before the final assessment. Just to note now that a final assessment does not have to be an exam. It can be a piece of coursework, but generally it is whichever piece of regularly scheduled assessment would be the last one in normal circumstances. And again, just to reiterate that as completion is marked against study intention, it's important to ascertain what the study intentions of students are at the start of the year. For HESES, we're not actually looking for you to return whether students will complete their course or not, because most won't finish their courses until well after HESES verification is complete. Instead, you will forecast non-completion based on historical data from a number of years. For example, if last year, say you had 100 students and 10 of them did not complete the year according to the OFS definition, on that basis you could say 10% of students did not complete their course last year and therefore forecast a 10% non-completion rate for this year. So if this year you had 120 students, you could apply that 10% non-completion rate and say you'd expect 12 of them not to complete the year of instance. When recorded in the workbook, this estimate of non-completion, so 12 in this case, must be recorded as a negative number in column 3. The workbook will go red if you enter any positive numbers in that column in the workbook. So it should be relatively difficult to do, but if you've got any errors in your workbook, double check column 3 because it's quite easy just to put them in as positive numbers, but they do need to be recorded as negative numbers. So, and then after this, estimates should be primarily based on the previous year's non-completion rates for that particular course. Though this should be moderated using 3 to 5 years of data weighted towards the most recent years. This helps avoid any given year's non-completion forecast from being skewed by exceptional circumstances that may have occurred in a previous year, as happened with most providers' 2019-20 data due to the pandemic. And providers may decide to ignore this anomalous year when making forecasts, as when applying our definition of completion, many students may count as non-completions, even though this may be through no fault of their own. And then a reminder before we move off the subject, just to reiterate, completion is not the same as progression. You need to use the HESES guidance and make forecasts of non-completions on the basis of historical data. And once we have your data and begin verification, we will compare your estimates for non-completion for this year against previous years. Whether there is a difference, we would like you to be able to explain why this exists. For example, if you have relatively few non-completions this year, it could be because you're no longer running a course that had noticeably high non-completion rates, which in turn could bring your average non-completion rates down. And we want you to be able to explain your non-completion forecasts, so it's important to have a good idea of where the information you use to make your forecasts has come from. And now, so we're finished with forecasting there. So if you've got any more questions on that, you can start firing them over into the Q&A box now, and we're going to move on to looking at how we calculate FTE. So we calculate FTE in column 4A, and this only appears in table 3. I say that it actually appears in table 6C as well, but we'll get onto that later when we cover the healthcare tables. But to recap quickly, at this point we will have filled in columns 1 and 2 with the correct years of instance, identifying which column they belong to by using the starting date compared to the census date. In column 3, we'll have made a forecast of the number of non-completions. There's negative numbers that will occur in the years of instance recorded in columns 1 and 2. And column 4 will have been automatically calculated by summing the previous 3 columns to get our total estimated completed years of instance. For full-time and sandwich year out years recorded in tables 1 and 2, this would be the tables completed. But for part-time students recorded in table 3, we have an additional column, column 4A. Here you will record the estimated full-time equivalent for completed years of instance shown in column 4. So we need to do this because in most cases, part-time students will be studying at a lower intensity or rate than those that are studying full-time. So you need to estimate how much activity they will be doing as we fund the activity of students, not just the head count of students. So we calculate full-time equivalents of a part-time course in a couple of ways, either on the number of credit studies or on the duration of the course. Ultimately, the FTE of a course should be the same regardless of whether it's completed full-time or part-time. And if we look at the example on the screen here, so we've got a full-time undergraduate degree that takes 3 years to complete. We count each full-time year as a full FTE, so 1 FTE per year. Say this course has a part-time version that takes 6 years to complete. We can calculate the FTE by dividing the full-time duration of 3 years by the part-time duration of 6 years to give ourselves 0.5 FTE. And then over the 6 years, these 0.5 FTEs would total up to 3 FTE, which is the same as for the full-time course. So we have actually recorded the same amount of activity overall for both courses. And then when we do this, when we calculate FTE on a credit basis, it gives us a little bit more flexibility. So we can see on screen here, we've got an example of a full-time undergraduate degree taken over 3 years with 120 credits taken each year. So this is totaling 360 credits overall. And the equivalent part-time course, students study for 6 years. However, they do not study an FTE of 0.5 per year for 6 years. They actually study 90 credits a year for the first 3 years, and they study 30 credits a year for the final 3 years. So what is the FTE for years 1, 2, and 3? When calculating FTE from the credits studied for the first 3 years, we know we have 90 credits in the part-time course compared to 120 credits in the full-time course. So we do 90 over 120, which equals 0.75 FTE for the first 3 years. Repeating these steps for the final 3 years, we know we'll end up with 30 over 120 and end up with 0.25 FTE for the final 3 years. And when we total up the FTE over the whole course, we can see we will end up with a total of 3 FTE, just like the full-time equivalent course. So using one of the methods shown in the 2 examples I've just quickly shown you here, you'll need to calculate the FTE for your part-time students and enter that FTE in column 4A of table 3. Once column 4A has been completed, you will have filled out all the information required in table 3, and then you can move on to completing some of the other tables in the workbook, such as table 5. And that is it for FTE at the moment. After the little break we've got now for Q&A, I can see we've got a few questions in for Ross already. We'll be tackling table 6, which are the healthcare tables. But yeah, over to you now, Ross.
Thank you, Will. We've got a couple of several questions in at the moment, which we'll go through. I think there are a couple more coming in, so I've got Graham who's just keeping an eye on those for me. The first question actually relates back to one of the previous questions that we had in our first session. So this is asking about the example that was given before, which I tried to address, where you have a student who's delayed their study, and as a result, their year of study is split between 2 years of instance. And the question is, would that student also move from table 1 full-time to table 3 part-time, assuming they didn't then meet the 21 hours a week over 21 hours a week over 24 weeks definition? So yes, that is certainly possible. Obviously, you'd have to determine that on an individual basis by looking to see how much time there was. But yes, it is certainly possible that because it's split between 2 years of instance, they might become part-time years of instance instead of full-time. That certainly is something that could happen. We have a question about withdrawals as well. So this question, which is coming from an anonymous attendee, has asked about the 2 kinds of withdrawals that were mentioned in the presentation. So they said that there's the students who've withdrawn within 2 weeks of their study and the students that withdraw before the census date, and asked if it wouldn't be easier just to say that students withdraw before the census date should not be returned for HESES purposes. And that is certainly to a degree true, because effectively it means that we've got kind of 3 different categories that we might be looking at. We might be looking at students who've withdrawn, and we should emphasize again that this is withdrawn in the sense of having completely left the course, not having suspended their studies. So these are students who you know have completely left the university and have no intention to return. So if they have withdrawn within 2 weeks of starting their instance and they have withdrawn before the census date, then yes, for both reasons, they should not be returned in HESES. If they have withdrawn before the census date, but they've gone more than 2 weeks, so they may be withdrawn after 3 or 4 weeks, then yes, again, certainly they should not be returned from the census date. But there's also a third category where you might have students who withdraw after the census date, or who you are forecasting to withdraw after the census date. You may be able to say that based on previous data, you would expect, say, 2 or 3. I mean, it will depend on your provider, how large it is and what sort of courses you offer. But there may be a certain number of students who you would expect to withdraw within 2 weeks of starting their study, but they would be starting their study with you in January. So you might be including in your forecasts for column 2 a factor to allow for that. So you might be saying that we need to make sure we don't record X number of students in column 2 because we are forecasting them to withdraw. So in a sense, you are right, but they also need to consider the fact that it isn't just about students who've withdrawn before the census date. There may be some others that you also need to account for. We've had a couple of questions about completion. So the first question that we've had from Alison is about whether whether resits count in completion. So we said that you don't have to pass an assessment, just sit it, but then you only have a certain amount of time. You only have 13 months for completion to take place. There is a specific bit of guidance in the HESES guidance about this. So if you go to the HESES guidance and it's Annex D, paragraph 2, it mentions that the final assessment, so for the purposes of calculating completion, the final assessment for a module is the one that has its first occurrence on the latest normal due date. So timing of resits and coursework extensions should normally therefore be disregarded when determining when the final assessment date is. So you're not including the timing of resits when you're determining what the final assessment is. So the final assessment does not change because of the resit. You would need to take into account the timing of when that resit happens to determine if completion occurs. So you do have to finish the resit within that 13-month window, but it doesn't change when the final assessment date is. So if you have students where they start on, let's say, the beginning of September, so 1st of September, they have until the, get this right, to be 13 calendar months, so 1st of September, 1st of October. Is that right? Is that 13 calendar months or is it 1st of November? They have 13 calendar months to complete their study intention. That's their completion window. If their normal times to do their exams is in June, that's the first occurrence of that final exam in June is the final assessment date. That's what it would be in terms of working out what that would be. If they fail that, or if they don't attend that, I should say, because it doesn't matter if they pass or fail it. If they don't attend that final assessment, they then have until the end of that 13-month window to do a resit. If they can't take the resit within that 13-month window, then yes, completion, they would not be able to complete. They've not been marked as they've not been considered a completion for that particular year. The related question that we have is, could a student be complete if he or she failed all assessments for the year, but attended all teaching and learning activities, including sitting all assessments? And the answer to that is yes, because it is about the attendance rather than whether they passed or failed. So the kind of background to this is that if a student has gone through all the work, and you've gone all through all the work of teaching them, putting on the assessments, they've actually done all that activity, then we want to be able to recognize that and to fund that. Whether they've passed or not is not something which is necessarily particularly in your control. So yes, it is about attendance. If they just turn up and they attend the exam for half an hour and then they leave, they've attended the exam and you consider them to be a completion from that point of view. Okay, we have a couple of questions here about census date. You might have to bear with me while I just look at this, and this is one that's come in. So can we confirm, this is the question, the anonymous question is asking if we confirm that in column 1 will be new students only, i.e. start date 1st of September to December 1st. No, you are recording all of your students, whether they are new starters to your provider or not. So they could be returning students. You're recording all students within HESES, and you are looking at when their year of instance starts. So in column 1, you're recording all years of instance that start between the 1st of September to, it looks like in this case, the 1st of December for this provider, but whichever your census date applies to you. And you're doing that for your new students, so the ones who are starting with you completely new between 1st of September 2021, 1st of December 2021. But you're also recording in that any students who will be starting their 2nd year, 3rd year, 4th year, etc. of study with you within that period as well. So if you had students who started on the 1st of September 2020, so they started with you last year, their 2nd year of instance will be about to start, will be starting this month with you. So you would also be recording them in column 1. Okay, we have another question that's come in. How is completion measured for research courses where there aren't any assessments as per other types of courses? So let me just check this. So we do have further guidance on this in the main HESES guidance document. And if specifically we do include advice on how to determine completion where you have no formal assessment. So it could be either whole years of instance, or it could be individual modules. So I'm just making sure I remind myself what we said. Generally, you can be looking at using attendance for this. So it may be less relevant to something like a research degree, but for an undergraduate course, you would be using attendance at lectures as a way of determining completion for this. If they've had a continual pattern of attendance throughout the course, then that can be used as evidence of completion. For research courses, you might have something similar where you could be looking at attendance at seminars. If you want to talk to us about this, this is something that we can certainly discuss with you by email. Another question about completions. What about if a student attended all 8 units in the year, but did not submit 1 assignment out of 8? Does it count as completion? So no, they have to complete their whole study intention. So if they miss that final assessment on 1 out of those 8 modules of those units, then they are a non-completion for the whole year. I have one follow-up question that's just come in from Pauline asking, what do you do if they did not submit coursework in June and the result is that they need to return the next academic year to repeat with attendance? I might need to talk to you, might need further detail on this one. I think my inclination at the moment is that they would probably be a non-completion. The fact that they are progressing or that they need to come back in the following year to repeat does not indicate completion. So progression is not the same thing as completion. It's quite possible for a student, for example, to have personal reasons, which mean they can't take one of their final exams, and there are valid personal reasons. There may be an academic decision at your provider that they should be allowed to return the next year and progress to the next year. Of course, that isn't necessary. That doesn't have any impact on completion. So my inclination is that they would be a non-completion because they didn't submit the coursework and they haven't resubmitted it. And then the fact that they are returning next year would not have any bearing on that. But if you want to discuss that with us further and give us more details, I'll be happy to do so. I think that is the last one we've had for now. So I'll pass back to you, Will, for the last section. Keep the questions coming in and we will come back to the questions later on.
Thank you, Ross. Okay, as promised, we will get on to tables 6A, 6B and 6C, which are also known as the healthcare tables. They're only used by a certain number of providers, so it might not be relevant to all of you, but we'll be coming back to the Q&A in 10 minutes or so. So hopefully you'll hang around for that if you could, for any questions, and then we've got just a little finish up at the end after this. But hopefully for those of you who this is useful for, we'll tick off some of the important things to know about these tables. So what are tables 6A, 6B and 6C for? So on these tables, you'll need to return students' years of instance that are on courses which on successful completion lead to registration as a professional in nursing, midwifery and other certain allied health professions. The list of professions can be found on table 6 in the workbook or in the HESES guidance. The tables don't record all healthcare professions. For example, students training to be paramedics or nursing associates are not included in these tables. Like tables 1, 2 and 3, these tables are mutually exclusive and separate years of instance by mode, where table 6A records full-time years of instance for these students, 6B is for sandwich year out, and 6C is part-time. All students in these tables should have already been recorded in the corresponding tables. So for 6A, that would be the student should have already been recorded in table 1, and for 6B, the student should have already been recorded in table 2. Though we do find this is quite rare to find any students on these courses that is actually on a sandwich year out, and then table 6C students should have already been recorded in table 3. Yes, these students need to be recorded again in these tables because their information needs to be broken down in a different way. In different ways. So in these tables, we break down the students' years of instance by their profession, their level, and by those that are starters in 2021-22. So again, just a recap on who is recorded in these tables. To be recorded in table 6, a student needs to meet the following requirements. So they must all be home fee students studying one of the pre-registration courses. As mentioned, not all the healthcare courses are recorded here, and these are all courses that are approved by one of the 3 regulatory bodies, which is the Nursing and Midwifery Council, the Health and Care Professions Council, and the General Dental Council. Consulting Annex L is the best way to identify whether courses need to be recorded in table 6, and the guidance provides links to each of the council's websites, which will tell you how to search for the courses that come under the pre-registration definition used for table 6. It's important to note that pre-registration is an attribute of the course, not of the individual student. The pre-registration course leads to first registration for that specific profession. The student is recorded in table 6A, 6B and 6C. Now we'll have a quick look at the structure of table 6. So you can see a small screenshot. Hopefully it's big enough for you to read most of it, but I do apologise that it's quite small. We can see on the left there is a column for profession, and they also have their price groups included in brackets too. So we can only see I think about 8 of the professions here, but I think there's about 18 in total in the tables. We also can see we've got level and length columns, and you can see level is simplified here compared to other tables because on these courses we only have students at UG level or PGT UG fee. The definitions for length, level and fundability all remain the same here as they were in the earlier tables, and the same for the columns as well. So column 1 is for for students whose years of instance start before the census date, and so on for the other columns. They're all the same. And the columns are broken down by OFS fundable students in all years of study, non-fundable students in all years of study, and then specifically starters in 2021-22 that are included in the previous columns, in the two previous columns. So, for example, if we were going to record some dental hygiene students who start before the census date, that we're recording column 1, we record all students in all years of the course that are OFS fundable in the column labelled A, which we can see in the red box here. We would then record all students in all years of the course that are non-fundable in the column labelled B. And then we want to know the subset of these fundable and non-fundable students who are starters in 2021-22. So only those that have started their pre-registration course in 2021-22 go here, and this is regardless of whether they're OFS fundable or not. So all the professions here are filtered out and are completed individually. The table is quite large because of this, because we've got about 18 professions. So we have enabled filtering by profession. So if you've only got 1 or 2 professions, which is usually the case, you can get rid of all the other courses, so you can make sure you're filling in the correct rows for your provider. That makes it just a little bit more manageable. Now we need to move on to just clarifying what the difference is between a starter and a new entrant. So starters are not the same as new entrants, which we refer to in table 5. So those recorded as a starter in tables 6A, 6B, and 6C, yeah, they're not the same group of students as new entrants, although there will be a lot of overlap. So starters on table 6 are those students who are starting or who started study for the first time on an eligible pre-registration course in that year. So if you're a starter in 2021-22, you're a starter in HESES21. You'll need to identify separately those students that are starters to record them in table 6. And additionally, you'll need to be able to identify starters for previous years to identify their fundability status. You want to check the guidance for further definitions for starters and fundability status for students starting in previous years. There are also some complications involving students that repeat a year or who transfer between different professions, and Annex L has more guidance for these situations. So that was just a quick tour of the healthcare tables. So we're back to Q&A now. I don't know if Ross has got any questions, but I'm sure he'll look forward to answering some. Hopefully he's there. Take it away, Ross.
I will. We haven't had any questions in just yet, so we may want to just give it a minute just to see if anybody has any follow-up ones which occur to them now. If not, we can always pass back to you in a second. One thing that I think we have had in is a request to just recap a little bit about how new entrants work. So just let me bring my notes up and then I will come back to that in a second. Where are we? New entrants. So new entrants are recorded in table 5. And in particular, we have a specific definition of new entrant here, which is not, I'd hasten to point out, the same as new starters as recorded on table 6, as Will's just talked about. So a new entrant is, or you can record a student as a new entrant in HESES when they have not been studying with your provider in either of the previous 2 academic years at the same broad level. So that's undergraduate or postgraduate. So it could be that a student might have previously studied with you, say they did a foundation degree. If they left it 2 years before coming back and doing a top up, you could record them as a new entrant. If they came back straight away, you would not be able to record them as a new entrant. If you have a student who studies with you this year, or let's say has studied with you last year to do, say, a bachelor's degree, but now is coming back to do something at a postgraduate level because they are changing level, you can record them as a new entrant because they would not have been studying at the same broad level. So new entrant is slightly different to starters, which is just something that we wanted to recap. There is further information on that in the guidance if you wanted to check those. And really, it's primarily of relevance to table 5, which is the only place that we sort of separate new entrants out from all of your provision. We haven't had any further questions in while I've been doing that.
Okay.
So I think I'm going to pass back to you, Will, just to finish the session off. If you do have any questions, if there's anything which occurs to you after we finish this, as I said, please do contact us through recurrentgrant@officeforstudents.org.uk or HESES@officeforstudents.org.uk, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have about funding or HESES.
Thank you, Ross. Right, so yes, I'm just finishing off now. So just going to recap on where you can find further information on the subjects we've covered today. So as you can see on the screen here, we've got further guidance on standard or non-standard years in Annex C. There's more information on non-completion forecasts in Annex D. We've got more information on FTE for completed years in Annex E, and then more on the health professions in Annex L. That can all be found in the HESES21 guidance. So let's just have a quick recap of what we covered today. Firstly, we were looking at how to count student years, and in particular, we looked at how to determine whether a student belongs to column 1 or column 2, which is based on when the year of instance starts for each student in relation to the census date. Then we looked at the forecasting elements. Firstly, the forecast of non-completion, where we want you to use historical data to inform your calculation of non-completions, giving due weight to more recent years. Being aware that you may need to disregard some recent non-completion data that may be anomalous, so that your forecast is not skewed by exceptional circumstances caused by the pandemic. Following on from non-completions, we looked at 2 methods of calculating FTE for part-time courses using either durations or credits. And lastly, we looked at the healthcare tables and how to identify students that need to be recorded here and what the definition of a starter is. So as stated at the beginning of the webinar, this is what we're trying to learn through our presentation today. So I hope you feel like we've covered these areas sufficiently. I'll also remind you that a recording of this webinar will be available in a day or 2 and will be uploaded to the OFS events page, and along with a copy of all the slides for today's webinar. Skip on there. So this was the end of our 3rd webinar, but there's always more. So there's our final and 4th webinar, excluding the workbook exercises, is on Wednesday, and we will be looking at how to submit your workbook and then how the OFS compares the data submitted to previous years to ensure your data is as accurate as possible, so that the funding we calculate for you reflects the activity and provision at your provider. And at the end, we will look at how to sign off your data so that when we reach the end of the process, everything will be in order to start calculating the funding allocations for the following year, hopefully for announcement in the spring. And before I say goodbye, just going to point you towards the most useful areas. So for more HESES guidance and supporting materials, officeforstudents.org.uk/HESES is the most useful place to go. If you've got any questions for us directly, we're available at HESES@officeforstudents.org.uk. And if you want to find recordings of these webinars, or there's a few extra HESES related videos, you can find them on youtube.com/officeforstudents. That's it for today. Just double check I've done everything. And yes, we're all good. So thank you for listening, and goodbye for now. See you on Wednesday.